Right. In this video, I want to talk more about the rapture. And I was actually seeing a depiction of the rapture in Acts chapters 23 and 24, and the story continues on. This is just where I stopped, so there might be more to this as you read into Acts 25 through 28. But I was seeing it starting here in Acts 23, but it may even start a chapter or so before, but this is where I would like to start for this video. Now, Paul, he wants to come back to Israel, to Jerusalem, and he wants to preach to the Jews. It's really impressed upon him to reach his brethren, even though he knows that he is called by God to go out to the Gentiles. That's what Jesus tells him when he meets him on the road to, uh, I can't remember the road where it's going. But you know what I'm talking about, where Paul's converted and he tells them that he's going to be used to reach out to the Gentiles. And he's known as the apostle to the Gentiles. And even with the council that he had with Peter, John, and James, they decided that Paul is going to go out to the Gentiles while they are going to go out to the Jews. But he still wants to reach his brethren. And during a feast, he wanted to get back before Pentecost. He comes to Jerusalem. And they're getting on him about, basically going out with the Gentiles, and he needs to be cleansed according to the law, show everybody that you keep the law. So he does the ritual purifying, but he says the Gentiles do not have to do any such thing, because that's what they decided in Acts chapter 15. But him being a Jew decides to do this. It's kind of like when people bring up Paul saying you don't have to be circumcised, but he went and circumcised Timothy, right? Well, they completely misunderstanding. Timothy's a Jew, so circumcision is something that they're going to do. They said that the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised, right? So there's something that people need to understand, that there is a difference between Jews and Gentiles. When you become part of the church, there is no difference anymore. But outside of the church, there's still a difference, right? It's like we have an inward spiritual life and relationship with God, but outwardly, nobody knows about that and can see that. It's a completely different world you're interacting with, right? There's the physical and spiritual. But anyway, Paul is going to the temple to do his purification to show that he keeps the law, but the people know what he preaches. So a lot of the Jews come after him and they want to grab a hold of him and basically kill him. And Paul knows that there's a division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that the Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead. They believe in the spiritual angels. So he uses this to get the Pharisees and Sadducees to fight with one another and to get the attention off of him and give him a bit of a protection, as he says that he's a Pharisee, that he believes this as well, so that the Pharisees back him up against the Sadducees, which might have actually saved his life. But because of this, they were coming after him to kill him. We see that Roman governors and what have you, they went and they took Paul to save his life. This is where we can see a rapture, and we see a Roman government, Gentile government, pulling Paul out from among two Jewish sects that want to end his life. And so it's like right before he's going to be torn apart, which is what it says, that they fear that that's what they were going to do to him, is tear him apart. They went down there by force and grabbed him, right? And if you're familiar with rapture, rapture comes from force. It comes from the word that means rape, which is a forced sexual congress. The rapture is being forcefully taken. So it could be like a kidnapping, or you grab a child off the street into a van, but it could also mean your child is about to walk into the street and you forcefully grab him to pull him back to save his life or her life from getting hit by a car, right? So the rapture means taken by force. It doesn't have to mean in an evil way or a good way. It can be either or. In this sense, it's in a good way. They forcefully snatch him. He gets raptured right here, right? When I was looking at how he was taken by force, that I was starting to think, hey, I think there's some kind of rapture going on here, because with Joseph, the story of Joseph in Genesis is a story of Jesus, who becomes second in command of the Gentile nation of Egypt, and he marries a Gentile woman right before we got 7 years of plenty and then a 7 years of famine. So a 7 year tribulation, we see Joseph takes a bride, right? Right before a tribulation. So we actually see that here, in a sense here, where a Gentile nation, where its head is Caesar, and though the Caesar does not represent Jesus and does a really shitty job of doing so, is in a sense a depiction of Jesus, as the Caesar claims to be the head of the government and the head of the church and a god on the earth. God is man. And the Jews see this as blasphemy. But that's a depiction of Jesus. It's a crappy depiction. It's a pagan, distorted depiction of Jesus, as Jesus is the true king and head of the church, and God as man, right? The, the Caesar is basically usurping that, and in this case, he's being used as an example or a metaphor, a typology here, to show that Jesus is taking Paul to save his life, right? And what's interesting is then right after there's judgment. And that's what it was looking like. Hey, this is a rapture. Paul was just raptured, right? And the Jews wanted to go after him and tear him apart. And what I noticed that a lot of people may not even realize, and they don't really talk about, is how mankind's life here on earth as a whole is a lesson to the angels. Like, the angels are watching us learning. They're learning about God, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about their relationship with God through our lives. And one of the depictions of that is with the nation of Israel, is representing the angels, as Israel is the son of God. And in the Old Testament, the sons of God only reference the angels, such as in Job. The sons of God came to present themselves before God, and the Jews come at the feast days to present themselves before God. Israel is a depiction of the angels, and the Gentiles is a depiction of the rest of mankind. Even though Israel is still lumped into with us as mankind, they're being set apart as an example to give us a depiction of heavenly things, of God and the angels, right? And the rest of the Gentiles representing mankind, where we have to come and become a Jew to be saved before Jesus. Before Jesus gave himself on the cross, you had to convert and become a Jew. This is actually an example of being born again. Because when you're born again, as we read in John chapter 1, that God has blessed us to be able to become the sons of God. And that refers to the angels. We become part of that spiritual family than those of us who believe on Jesus and his name. And he talks about being born again in John chapter 3, talking to Nicodemus about being born of the water of your mother's womb in the flesh. You got to be born again by the Spirit. And he talks about how that happens is that when you believe when Jesus was put up on a tree, just like Moses lifted up the serpent on the staff, whoever believes, they're not condemned. They have everlasting life because they have been born again and become a son of God. Right? And I would get more into that, but it's diverting from what I want to get into here. I just want to make the point that Israel is representing the heavenly, right? So when we see the high priest and the elders, and they're coming to persecute Paul, this is representing of Satan and his fallen angels, who are a minority, right? When you look at Revelation 12, Satan gets cast down with a third of the angels. So he's a minority. And Israel, to the world, is a minority, right? And they're here accusing Paul and condemning Paul, and it's all a bunch of lies, basically, right? And this is after he is taken. We have Tertullus, who's acting, or Tertullus, I'm not sure how to say that, Tertullus, that this guy is acting as Satan, as he is accusing. And what was interesting is that we know that Jesus is the high priest, and the elders are the church when we read Revelation chapters 4 and 5, that the church is raptured, and they're the church that has been saved from every nation, tongue, and kindred, and that they have been made kings and priests unto God, just like John tells us in Revelation chapter 1, that we have been washed in the blood of Jesus and been made kings and priests unto God. So it says, Ananias and the high priest descended with the elders. So you see, he comes down, descended. It's very interesting that that's the word that he uses there. And an orator named Tertullus comes, and he is also acting as Satan here, accusing Paul. So in chapter 24, we have the high priest and the Jews looking like the fallen angels. But then when we come over here, it's slightly different. As we see the high priest and the elders seems to be a representation of the church and Jesus coming back down. So with this whole rapture thing, this can be a representation of the rapture happening, and this is a coming back down to um, rescue the Jews, as a lot of this has to do with Israel and the Jews, what we're talking about here. And here Paul is being judged, right? And one of the interesting things that is said, which is you get in this mix here of a pre-tribulation rapture, right? Right when things are getting rough and you're about to be torn in half, you get saved, right? But then you also get this depiction of returning, and there's judging, right? And the accuser, Tertullus, or Satan, says here at verse 7 that, well, right after at verse 6, verse 6 is important where he's talking about we would have judged him according to our law, right? Because he profaned the temple and whatnot, right? And we know that our body is the temple. So there's all kinds of meanings going on here. But he says at verse 7, but the chief captain Lysias came upon us and with great violence took him away out of our hands. So Lysias might have something to do with Michael, because we know that Michael fights against the dragon and his angels in Revelation chapter 12. and again, it takes Paul by great violence, right? A rapture, a twinkle in an eye, just tooken, right? And when we continue, Paul says his piece. So it's almost as if Paul, in a sense, can represent Jesus standing up for us, but at the same time, we have to stand up for ourselves and declare our beliefs. As Paul here says that, hey, I just believe the scriptures. I believe everything that is said there, right? And it's at verse 14? That's really sticks out where he says, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. So he's saying, hey, they call it heresy, but I believe all the things that are written in the Bible. Right? At the time, it was the Old Testament scriptures, the Torah and the Tanakh. Today, the Bible. He's saying, I just believe everything that's in there. They call it heresy. What of it? Right? And he was saying they can't prove anything they accuse me of. Right? And that's where I was saying, hey, that's our judgment, right? Where everything they accuse us of, there's no evidence of, because it's all been paid for by Jesus Christ. And I know later on, Paul appeals to Caesar himself, right? So when they're trying to kill him, and as he's going to Caesar, he gets in a shipwreck. So it's almost like they're trying to prevent this from happening, right? Where what at the rapture is kind of like a Red Sea event, where Moses parted the Red Sea and Israel crossed, and then the army of the Egyptians was squashed. A similar thing happens where we're taken up in the rapture, we're taken up through the heavens to meet God face to face, and Satan, as the Egyptian army is coming after us, and then Michael and his angels cast them down. A very similar event going on there, and we can see that shipwreck as an attempt to prevent this from happening, the rapture, and from God actually getting his people, right? But we notice everybody on the ship, as we read the story, that they're saved. It says they're saved alive. And he ends up getting to Rome. And the book of Acts doesn't really get into the rest of the story there, because I think the book of Acts just wanted to tell you about this story here of the church, because the book of Acts is a transition from Judaism to Christianity, right? From reaching only the lost sheep of the house of Israel to reaching the whole world. And we see this transition. So I think the book of Acts is just mainly getting to that point. And as we see with the Jews, how they looked upon the Gentiles as trash, basically, right? They're not worthy of being with them. We get an idea of how Satan and his angels see mankind. We're like, no, they don't. They're not worthy of joining us, right? Even though we can look at Jews and Gentiles and see we're both undeserving and both have the same right to come to God, and he could adopt us all, right? But their pride and their arrogance and their self-righteousness makes them think that they're better, and they reject the Gentiles just as Satan and his angels reject mankind. So I'm just making this video to share the insight I was getting while reading this. And the other thing was that I can't post this right away to YouTube because apparently a video I posted about 5 months ago, a Revelation study part 7, has been taken down on YouTube. They haven't said exactly why. It just apparently I said something in that video that maybe a trigger word, I don't know, something in that video that they flagged and they took the video down. I'm thinking of checking the video out later on and maybe I can find out what it was, but they didn't clarify. I don't know if it was a comment on it on the video. It didn't give me any detail. Um, and I'm not going to fight against them because I've had other channels on YouTube, and every time I didn't appeal, they just flagged me more times and then end up taking down my channel. So it's just like you gotta put up with their shit. There's not much you can do about it. Other than I'm posting this on BitChute and Rumble as well. And after 2 weeks, because I can't post for 2 weeks on YouTube, I am going to just put up something there, uh, you know, telling people what I'm telling you now. And that if you want to still check out my videos, you're going to have to check out BitChute and Rumble. And if there's any other cool sites like that, let me know, and I can start uploading to them as well. But anyway, thanks for watching, and take care.